Do you have any idea who the man of sin might be?
Yeah, maybe. I think right now we're still in the thing where he's behind the scenes because
Yeah,
I used to think that the abomination of desolation was going to be would be the marker that would tell you who the man of lawlessness is.
sure.
Um, but it's, if you read in Daniel 11, it says his forces will rise up against the temple fortress,
Yeah,
right? But that doesn't necessarily mean that he is going to be visible.
right.
So he's behind the forces, but until he sets himself up in God's temple and declares himself to be God. But I think that the probably we're looking at right now already the rise of the beast.
Yeah,
Um, and and we've always talked about, or most people have talked about, even I've talked about the beast from the sea being a man.
okay. From like the sea of
Except,
people.
yeah, but except in Daniel 7, it talks about this great beast with 10 horns
Mm-hmm.
that is the last empire,
Right.
and it's different from all the others. And so we know that, actually, no, this last beast with 7 heads and 10 horns represents, these world kingdoms. I
Right.
mean this world empire that's made up of the nations. And why
Yeah.
does it have 7 heads? Because those heads are people groups. They are countries. They're assemblies of countries, something like that. The
Sure.
horns are specific people, but there's 10.
Yeah.
And then there's one that rises up that speaks, that has eyes like a man and speaks boastful, has a
Mm-hmm.
mouth that speaks boastfully. So that's probably representing a person, but it's a person who's part of this conglomeration, this terrible beast, right, with multiple heads and multiple horns.
Yeah.
And you mean kind of like the WEF and the UN and the WTO and the WHO and the IMF, and how many more extra acronym agencies, the G7, the G20.
Right.
We've got all these groups of the elites that are trying to run the world and throw out this agenda, 2030 plan, etc., so that we'll own nothing and we'll be happy.
Right.
What is this, right?
Yeah.
This is like an empire like has never existed of any of the other empires that have come before it.
Yeah.
And so I think that some of this we're watching, and then the personalities of who's going to play what role, we know a lot of the actors.
Yeah.
Um, but who's going to be? I mean, Klaus Schwab's in a pretty good place.
Yeah.
There's a lot of really interesting stuff about King Charles,
Yeah.
that puts him in an interesting place. There's, who's the guy that Guterres, that's the head of the UN, is in a very key spot.
Yep.
Tedros in the WHO is in a very big spot. Like, you have a lot of people who you kind of go, oh, they could be some of these horns already. Maybe it's not so complicated. Like, we've got a lot of things that we've imagined, and then we're looking at this monstrosity that's growing right in front of us, and we're like, yeah, but that's not it. It's going to be something different.
Right. Exactly. The most interesting explanation that because so my assumption I went down this weird rabbit hole of because of the 7 heads that if you go back to the beginning of Revelation when it talks about the 7 churches,
Yeah.
one of the churches, Sardis, is dead, but it has a name that it lives, right?
Yeah.
I didn't think it was any coincidence that the beast had 7 horns, but one of them was wounded, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I went down this rabbit hole of wondering, I wonder if this isn't like a false church, if there's not like the true church and the false church, if that's not like there's some division that's coming and this isn't the rising up of some false church. And then I watched this video from this YouTube channel called Armageddon News.
Okay.
And it was when I was studying Islam because
Mm-hmm.
we had a guest on our channel. We had a guest on our channel who had mentioned that the gift giving that happens when the 2 witnesses are killed is an Islamic practice. Like, literally, when they kill somebody that is of great
Mm-hmm.
importance, they literally give gifts out. They even hand out candy on the streets. So I went down this
Okay.
rabbit hole of studying Islam, And it turns out that a lot of those areas in Turkey where the 7 churches started
Mm-hmm.
have strong ties with Islam now. So it's almost like
Oh yeah.
it's almost like there's this dual thing that I'm wondering if there's not something to that. So like you said, there's so many candidates. I don't know if we can really if we have enough information to kind of nail it down. But
Yeah.
there's definitely some interesting prospects in regards to that.
Yep. And actually, the point you made about the 7 churches, I think, is also interesting because when you think about the beast with 7 heads and 10 horns,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of times people have been looking, oh, well, it has to be 10 nations
Right.
or it has to be 7 groups. And I started thinking about that and going, okay, yeah, maybe for sure it could be, right? Could be, but we know that the image overall is symbolic.
Right.
It's a beast with 7 heads and 10 horns. We're not looking for, a monster from the movie Pacific Rim to rise up out of the sea.
Right.
So, so we know it's symbolic, but 7 and 10 have to be literal.
Sure.
Or are 7 and 10 symbolic too? Because 7 is a very symbolic number, and so is 10.
True.
And so,
Yeah.
so just like the 7 churches, do we think that there's only 7 churches, or does the number 7 mean all the churches?
Right.
Right? So the same thing, 7 heads might just mean all the nations, right? All the big groups.
Yeah.
10 horns is another 10, but 10 is also a number of completion.
Yep.
And it means, it's not lacking anything. It's complete. It's like a cycle that's complete. So
Mm-hmm.
all the world leaders are part of this thing.
Sure.
Which
Sure.
actually, I would, I don't think anybody would dispute that. Who
No.
doesn't
Yeah.
think
I mean,
that
that's
world leaders
a
in power
valid
today-
point. Sure.
Right, they're in on it. Like you
Yeah.
just go like they're all taking us to the same direction, even though the people don't want to go there.
Sure.
Right.
Yeah. So who do you think out of that is so we don't really have an idea, but somebody will probably rise up and declare themselves to be God. That's what we're kind of looking for. Out of
Yes. So somehow that, I think, of course, it has to be fulfilled that way, right? But what does that mean exactly? Certainly, that has to still be seen. And will it? What we've imagined, though, is that ultimately one person is going to become super dictator over everything, and we're going to be back to like one guy holding, like a Hitler,
Sure.
who's over everything.
Yep.
And or Stalin, or whatever, one guy who's going to be the leader. And but this last empire is unlike any that has ever come before.
Yeah.
So I don't know that this, what we're looking at now, that's this global government rule by committee, maybe that's not going to go away. Maybe
That makes sense.
it's Satan is going to be ultimately the one who's directing people and bringing them all together, but that you're not going to have like one central single person, like you're going to have a mouth person,
Mm-hmm.
right? But it's going to, I think, remain this monstrosity that we're looking at. I keep using that word, but it's like you look at this weird government and all these different heads and all these different voices,
Sure.
and yet we kind of have one direction, right? There's sort of one agenda that's mysteriously come out of nowhere, and everybody just goes, yes, that's great, let's do it.
That makes sense. I mean, you have to have, when you're ruling something the size of a planet, you have to have people helping you. Whether
Right.
it's a spiritual director or a physical director directing it, we all know it's coming from the devil. So we know the source.
Yeah. Right.
Whether he has a puppet here, whether he's an actual individual or something else, but that makes perfect sense.
Yeah, and even going back to your sign in Revelation 12, the next sign is a great red dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns.
Mm-hmm.
That is Satan.
Yep.
And then the very next, in chapter 13, it starts off with the beast with 7 heads and 10 horns.
Mm-hmm.
And so we know that, yes, ultimately Satan is the beast.
Yeah.
Even though he's going to be acting through, all the nations and all the peoples, and he's really, this is his time.
Yeah.
And he's going to get his time to control the whole earth.
Thank you for watching this clip from our live show. We present this information for your study and consideration, not as an absolute truth, but as a means to help you form your own understanding. Remember, like the Bereans, we encourage daily study and discernment to determine the validity of these insights. Join us live Sunday through Thursday as we continue this investigative journey. as we study to show ourselves approved unto God. See you there.